Hello there. A day after the latest round of China-U.S. trade talks ended without a deal, U.S. President Donald Trump bashed China and said the U.S. would impose 10% tariffs on another $300 billion worth of Chinese goods starting from September 1st. So has the truce ended? And what will the impact of the new tariff announcement be? How can the two sides continue to negotiate as planned, with trust and mutual respect apparently in short supply? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined by Professor John Gong from the University of International Business and Economics and Ina Tangen, our current affairs commentator. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Chong Lei. So welcome to the show, Zhong and Ina. And I must say that when I saw that tweet a few days ago, I was quite shocked, because just 2 days before that, we heard that there were trade talks and they were constructive. Were you surprised, Ina?
Well, it wasn't just 2 days. It was a couple of hours afterwards when the decision was made, and it's bizarre, to say the least. And one wonders if this is just showmanship. Setting a date, September 1st, trying to figure out some way of not only pressuring China, but suppressing the news at home. Remember, every single news station, newspaper was covering this, because this is the big news. Markets started tanking, right? This is absolutely incredible that the President of the United States is going out there and deliberately sabotaging his own economy.
We know that he enjoys this kind of showmanship, right?
But I think in all fairness, there are signs that this negotiation round was not going well. I mean, even before the American team left for China, remember he went into a lengthy, ranting and raving. No, not just Twitter. In answering a question to a reporter, he was talking about how China's trade surplus was all money stolen from the U.S. Blah blah blah.
Yeah, but that's a load of rubbish. That's a load of rubbish.
Well, this is the first sign that I see. The second thing I think that doesn't bode well is that remember the talk ended unexpectedly, like 40 minutes earlier. And right after that,
China said that.
Let me finish. The American team head to the airport right away without talking to reporters, and then the American official press release didn't come out until the team arrived in Washington D.C. And if you look at these two versions, there are noticeable differences here. Right, so it tells me that
but between that and jumping to this 10% tariff on $300 billion, that's quite something else. And $300 billion.
John, I have to say he's minimizing this. This is truly bizarre. You don't put out a statement that the talks were constructive, and then 2 hours later say, "Oh, and my response to that is 10% tariffs on everything else that I haven't done." $300 billion.
That I agree. That I agree. I mean, this is a new. We got education on the new meaning of constructive. In a realm of international relations.
Imagine if it had been unconstructive.
Oh, wow, yeah, or destructive. Yeah. So what about the losers in this? Because right now all of the headlines are screaming that this will be the time that Trump has stolen Christmas, because this September is when suppliers really start to deliver their goods, and this is when everything is going to be affected.
Everyone is a loser. There's no winner in a trade war.
A lot of consumer
American consumers are losers. American companies are losers. Chinese companies, the vendors here in China are losers. Chinese workers are losers. President Trump is a loser. Everybody's a loser.
So I think and go beyond that. The whole world loses. You're talking about the U.S. and China, the two largest consuming nations in the world. And all of a sudden, both of them are going down, and they're going to take the rest of the world.
But President Trump is saying that the U.S. is raking in the tariffs, the billions.
Oh, that's nonsense. No one believes that except
Fox
maybe
anchor
him.
Neil Cavuto has done a fact check and warned viewers that he is actually not.
He's not the only one. This has been refuted so many times.
In my opinion, this question about whether American companies, American consumers, whether paying for the tariffs is a very technical economics question, and I think it's well beyond his understanding. And I can.
Are you saying that facetiously?
And I can point out several studies. I mean, these are professional academic studies, both done in China as well as in the U.S., unanimously pointing to direction that actually the American consumers are paying for
directly or
it.
indirectly.
Right. So it's a complicated issue. I mean, he got to understand this, but of course he refuses to.
Yeah, but
admit.
it's somebody in the broad daylight at noon saying, "Oh, it's completely dark out." I mean, it doesn't make any sense. No one believes it. I mean,
So how
Larry
long before-
Kudlow comes on TV. This was a guy who was wedded to free market principles, and he says, "Well, maybe I don't think the American consumers will suffer."
That's why he's kept his job.
Well, I know, but when you have a president who is uttering nonsense, who's being supported by his administration, it begins to bother you.
But nobody's pushing back.
Let me also
in
put
any
things into
meaningful way.
perspective. I mean, that's a lot of money actually. $300 billion, 10% tariff, that's $30 billion. On average, that's each American family is paying something like $300 to $400 per household, assuming like 100 million households.
That
in
was
the
the
US.
first. That was the first thing. So
per year,
25.
per year,
So
per
he's
year.
adding another 400 on top of all the other tariffs.
I'm
that
talking
he's
about
adding.
10% of $300 billion.
$300 billion,
But that's still a lot of money. I mean, asking an average American family to cough up, $300, $400 a year, that's quite a surprise to a lot of people.
And we saw the statistics when the government shut down. All right, this was the office, the Congressional Office of Budget came out and said 40% of Americans do not have $400 period
Right, I was just
in
about to
case
say
of
that.
an emergency.
Right.
So now he's taking out this 400 plus the tariffs from before.
Right.
We're talking somewhere in between $1,000, $1,200 per family.
Right.
This is going to be the Trump that stole Christmas.
But we're not seeing an impact on American economic data as yet from the
Yes,
previous
you have.
rounds of
There's going to be
tariffs.
lag. There's going to be lag. I think I was in the U.S. about a month ago. I think I'm starting to see price
hikes?
hikes. Yeah, a little bit higher than I saw, last year.
So retailers are going to be hit the most, right?
Take a look at the last data that came out. Everything was down except...
But still growing.
No, everything was down. Manufacturing
Adding
is
jobs.
way down. Yeah, jobs looks good, but you start looking, if people aren't investing,
Yeah.
right, making hard decisions to make more factories and things like this, there's no pipeline. Jobs in the future are going to go down. Now, if you
Especially
start,
in retail, I guess.
yeah, if you start looking at the only two numbers that were really positive, it was government outlays, government expenditure, and then consumer expenditure. But that's not going to last long. You can't say, I'm going to spend money I'm not getting. There is not enough money being put into the system through additional disposable income to support what people are doing. So the reality is going to come home September, October, November. People are going to look into their piggy bank and they say, oh, prices are up. I can't afford to give my children what they wanted. We're going to have to cut back.
So let's look at the Chinese response, because the statement from the Ministry of Commerce is that China will have to take necessary countermeasures. What might these include? Are we talking rare earths? Are we talking the yuan? What are we talking about?
Well, in my opinion, we still have some exports from the U.S. or imports from the U.S. that haven't been we can add taxes on. Tariffs on. But that's it's not going to match up because we import a lot less than we export over there. But I think there are other measures that the Chinese side can take. For example, you mentioned rare earth. There might be other possible means. But my
non-tariff barriers.
My hope is that let's not go down to that path. Still keep in mind that this is still a tweet at this point, right? And also he says he will, okay, he will. And there's also a report from CNBC says that he might change his mind if the negotiation goes well. I mean, the negotiation is still ongoing right now.
There's no real negotiation. The issue here is how can you have negotiation with somebody who is completely untrustworthy? All right, you cannot be in a situation where I don't believe what you're saying, and I don't believe you'll carry out even if you do. How can I have a negotiation with you?
Yeah.
It's impossible.
I mean, end of June, they say it's a truce, and then come
but
end of July.
There was never
no
really
truce.
a truce, because
The
Trump
tariffs
said
were rolled back.
it was you give me this, I give you that. We'll start buying more agriculture. You lay off on Huawei.
Okay,
and they never laid off on Huawei.
Well, my understanding is that the meeting, the face-to-face meeting, is going to be held in early September. But in between the time, there's supposed to be working group people, lower than the leaders of the two negotiation teams, keep in touch. They still talk to each other via other communication means. So even though
I don't envy the jobs.
I think if that channel is cut off right now, there would be very severe statement from Chinese official, Ministry of Commerce, from Vice Premier's office right now. But the fact that it hasn't come out yet, that means that probably at least as of now, there still might be communication going on between the two sides.
But you also have to start thinking about the timing of all of these things. You know, Donald Trump wants to cry and put pressure on China.
He wants to pressure the Fed.
Yes,
right.
and he wants to pressure everybody. But let's look at the timing. September 30th, that's just a month before the 70th anniversary of China's National Day. The 90 days that he gave the WTO and the OECD, oh, guess what? It's also coinciding with this period. Right. He's trying to put maximum pressure. Also, he knows full well that that most of the government high leaders go on vacation for the first 2 weeks of August. So he's timing this. It's a very, very deliberate Trump. He likes to know where your pressure points are. He keeps pushing the buttons.
Right. And Trump is also claiming that China didn't do what it promised in Osaka, which is to buy more U.S. agricultural goods. But China is saying that that is not true.
Well, I think it's not true in the sense that it's conditional, I think. And if you look at the official statement from Chinese government, it says that China is in the process of initiating purchases of these agricultural products, and U.S. is going to create favorable conditions, right? The second part is very important. But if you look at the American...
Favorable conditions for the purchases.
I think they're related, of course, right? But what do that mean? What are these favorable conditions? We don't know yet, right?
Yeah, but there's also Huawei. Huawei was
I think it's possible. I think possible.
It wasn't mentioned on this side, but it was quite clearly
that
part
I agree.
of it.
I think Huawei might well be one of the favorable conditions. But anyway, the American official statement doesn't contain that part. It just says that China's going to make these purchases. I don't think that China is going to make this purchase unconditionally. Look, I mean, at this point, we're engaging in trade negotiation. We're not going to place big orders unconditionally. So I think it's got to be...
What do you make of this theory that, aside from pressuring China, Trump is also trying to pressure U.S. Fed Chair Jerome Powell into cutting rates further?
Of course.
By worsening the economy. That just sounds...
By making threats like this. I mean, the amount of forward-going investment, as I keep saying, is down. This is a very important factor, and you'd agree with me on this. When people aren't putting any money into the pipeline, you're not going to have favorable conditions. You're going to start to see people being laid off. You had 600 companies, American companies, showing up at Congress, 7 days of testimony, virtually all of them saying exactly the same thing. Don't do this. This is going to ruin business, and this is going to hit consumers. And despite that, Donald Trump is earned. The question is this just his way of diverting attention? Does he at the last moment say, oh, I called Xi Jinping, we're such good friends, I'm going to delay it?
Do you think people are getting sick of this last-minute calling off the pressure tactic?
His playbook is absolutely transparent right now, and this is the problem that the Chinese government has. If they respond, he will respond, and it becomes this escalating war of words.
So it's going to be the silent treatment from now on?
No, I think China has to make some sort of response. They've indicated that they will. I think next week we're going to see it roll out, and then we're going to see what the U.S. reaction is.
Is it going to be the entities list? Is it going to be...
I think it's very possible. I think China has said that it will create its own entity list. There are companies that have been reportedly being targeted. For example, we know FedEx, right? This company that is involved in the scandal with respect to Huawei's parcels might well be end up on that list. I mean, who knows?
But wouldn't that be self-destructive? On the one hand, China's saying we want to create a favorable condition for foreign investors to come in.
Foreign investors, but you can't have somebody, if somebody wants to go to war with you, you can't welcome them into your house and say, please, do whatever you like.
Yeah, I read this.
My opinion is that in terms of retaliatory measures, I think China is not going to take the first shot. That's my opinion. Because right now, as I said, I emphasize this again, that so far still a tweet. He said he will impose tariffs. So we'll wait to see whether he will impose tariffs or not.
So China will say if the tariffs are
that's
imposed,
my guess.
Then we will do this.
That's my guess.
So Julian Evans-Pritchard from Capital Economics is saying that in terms of hitting back at the U.S., it's difficult to do it without hurting China itself. Do you think that's true? Or to what extent do you think that's true?
of course, I mean, this is a path that China doesn't want to get into in the first place, right? So we still want a deal here. We don't want to get down into this path of escalating the retaliatory measures and not reaching a deal. I think what he said is absolutely not correct. China doesn't, I don't think China wants to delay this until, he's out of office to deal with a Democrat president, Joseph Biden. I don't believe that. I mean, we're talking a lot of money here. I mean, this is 25% on hundreds of billions of dollars. And why would China wait for another year and a half for that?
You look skeptical.
No, I think Donald Trump is trying to figure out some way where he can keep China off balance and then at the last moment get a deal. His secondary is he's going to say that the Chinese government is in cahoots with whoever the Democratic candidate is, and therefore that's why people should vote for him.
But all the Democrats are now talking more tough on
Yeah,
China.
they are.
Except Joseph Biden. Except Joseph Biden.
Well, but it's not clear who the candidate is going to be. But you can be assured, during elections, all right, China is a punching bag, and both parties participate in it. The question is, once they're in office, do they become rational?
Do you think they will? Do you think the near-term...
I think if Donald Trump is not able to put off a deal, I think he will be out of office. I think people will remember this Christmas that is coming, and if it is as big a disappointment as we think it will be, people will be looking. Remember, most average Americans look in their pocketbook when they vote. If it's less than when they voted last time, they will change. If
So
it's
you
more,
think
they'll keep.
whether he can get a deal is the biggest deciding factor in the election?
Yes. He's promised it. He said he would tame the deficit and that he would, in essence, keep China down. And if he isn't able to deliver, he doesn't have his full set of promises.
Before this whole thing, blowing to a big thing, American people really don't care too much about China-U.S. trade. I mean, the China issue, I think, so far hasn't really been a focal point of the 2020 presidential election. But I think President Trump, immigration is, for example, right? President Trump has I think he has a strategy of dragging this issue into the campaign, and he can, tell the American public that this is very important. I'm being tough on China, and this is one of the very key presidential election issues. I think that's his strategy.
Yeah, but that strategy backfires when you're a farmer who's gone out of business and you hear that it's all for the greater good, and meanwhile your family is penniless and you are forced to take refuge with your relatives.
And Trump is also...
regarding this issue, I was refuted by a Yale University professor the other day on this studio, that he said, the population of farmers in the United States is minuscule. It's not one of the major issue in the...
It's less than 2%. I represented a farming state, Wisconsin.
Wisconsin is very important,
but
yeah.
What you don't understand is that although it's less than 2% actually involved in agriculture,
I agree.
When you start looking at these small towns, there's a very, very long value chain that feeds into it. Cargill, all of these large industrial companies, the seed companies, these are all things that feed into this. So this idea that there's, just a few farmers, who cares about them?
I totally agree with you.
That would be a real backfire. And people identify with farmers.
Yeah, there are actually several very key important swing states. Wisconsin is one, Pennsylvania is one, maybe Iowa is another one. And all these states, every farmer's vote really counts. So I think it's very important.
What about the manufacturing industry? Do you think people really
believe
that manufacturing will come back to the U.S. as Trump promises?
No.
And look, let's look at the latest data, things. So trade with China has gone down 14%. China is no longer the number one. It's the number 3 behind Canada and Mexico. And what did the trade deficit do? It went down by 0.3%. So that tells you the issue is not China. It's the appetite of American consumers for goods that are made overseas. You're not going to stop that.
How many average Americans actually get that?
Get that? Well, they don't get it from Trump because he never tells them that.
People don't understand that. I mean, American people don't understand. This is a very complicated...
If I buy a car from Germany and not from America, they should be able to understand that the car is not made... Well, some German cars actually are made in America. But if they import something...
Sometimes, especially
well, this is the problem.
Like
this is the point. You have disinformation, misinformation, misleading information being put out there as factual. I mean, we could start on the number of lies that Donald Trump went through, but we would never have enough time.
Over 10,000. Over 10,000, according to Washington Post.
It's actually incredible to be sitting here questioning. I mean, yes, sometimes politicians, don't always
polish the truth.
Yeah, polish the truth. But in his case, he just ignores it.
And what about the prospects for China-U.S. relations going forward? I mean, they seem to be, I guess, battling on so many fronts, be it technology, trade, or even Hong Kong.
You're absolutely right. It's very difficult. I think it's very difficult. It's more than just a trade issue. I think overall, United States, the entire China policy has shifted. It views China as a revisionist state. This is official in its security review, its defense review. It views China as a competitor, if not an adversary. So I think the attitude towards China is actually quite unanimous across both aisles, right? Both Congress and
there's only a few intellectuals who believe that engagement is positive.
And their voices.
Well, you had that letter, the 150 of them signed onto that. It was not the most complimentary letter towards China. It actually contained a lot of criticisms, but they said engagement is absolutely necessary. The rest of them were saying this. But here's the irony. China needs the U.S., U.S. needs China. U.S. needs China's markets, or they're, literally, corporations have nowhere to grow. China needs the U.S. in the sense that for a stabilized world, if you got rid of 25% of the world's consumption, right, this would have a devastating effect on the entire world. China wants a stable world where trade can happen, not one in free fall because of the ego of one man.
Speaking of free fall, what did you make of the market reaction after the Twitter storm?
It dropped.
It was negative, but it wasn't devastating.
Well,
markets are priced in his bluster?
No. I think the market was caught by surprise by his tree storm. It dropped, I think, between 1% to 2% and recovered a little bit. But apparently, I think the market doesn't expect that. It was a big surprise to the market.
Look, the market's been jerked around by Donald Trump so many times that there is this kind of discount factor. It's fatigue and discount. What is he going to say? Can he actually do that? We had 600 companies go there and tell him, don't do this. We've had every single consumer group, economists tell him you can't do this. Is he really going to do it? Probably not. And I think that's what they're holding on to.
Do you think retailers will actually hold prices?
They can. I mean, exactly. The margin on these in the retail sectors is a razor thing. So they have to pass on to consumers. And the prices at Walmart, at Target, they're going to go up.
So what is the thinking is that as long as they are holding China down at whatever cost to itself, and maybe helping smaller countries like Vietnam, it's okay. It's a cost that they're willing to bear.
Remember, he put a bullseye in Vietnam before the G20 and said, they're the second worst country in the world. Why?
Yeah.
Well, they have a trade surplus with us, therefore they must be evil.
Yeah. Which country hasn't he attacked?
Well, no, but the irony is he hits China, people go down to Vietnam, and then he hits Vietnam. Well, if you take that logic, he's not going to be satisfied unless you go to the U.S. But anybody who's producing in the U.S., unless they're using very high-tech means, is not going to be competitive worldwide. So in essence, the only place you'll be able to sell your things are in the U.S., assuming there are protectionist measures.
What I've heard is that companies start to diversify. They're going to distribute their manufacturing base across several countries now, not just concentrate on one country, because
diversify their risk.
It doesn't matter which country it is. It's going to be targeted by Donald Trump.
You have no choice.
And the international community has been rather quiet on this.
What can you say? I mean, what you could say, we told you he's crazy, okay? But that's about all. I mean, people are stunned, but it's kind of, they're halfway expecting this behavior because it's been repeated so many times. So, I mean, here's a guy who was, calling Little Rocket Man, Kim, all this. Now he's defending him when he's firing off missiles. Before, when he was firing off missiles, it was terrible. He was going to, blow the place up and all this type of stuff. So, no, there's no expectation when it comes to Donald Trump. All you know is he wants to move the news cycle. He wants to control it for his own purposes.
So, should we ignore him?
No, we can't. I mean, we are. This is the second or third. Now it's third largest trading partner. We have hundreds of billions of exports to the U.S. We have American companies here operating here in China. If they leave, they will leave behind a lot of jobs and tax revenues and all that. So I think this is an issue we have to stay with. I mean, we just have to deal with this issue.
And along with that issue, the reason I agree with John on this in terms of how the Chinese government will go at, they have no interest in hurting their consumers, right? They don't want to hurt their people. So they're trying to figure out the best ways to fire back without doing damage to their own economy. This is something that Donald Trump obviously does not understand.
So let's get back to the possibility of using rare earth restrictions as a way to fight back. Do you think China can do that while minimizing damage to itself, to its big trading partners like Japan?
China can do that, but I'm a little bit skeptical about its long-term effectiveness, because it's not like the United States doesn't have this mineral resources. As we all know, the Maury Corporation has a mine used to have a mine operating on the border of Nevada and California.
Yeah, they reopened it.
Now it's back. So I think in the short run, the supply may be curtailed, but U.S. will ramp up production on its own.
No, this is the same question or issue that we have in reverse. When the U.S. becomes an unreliable supplier, right, people automatically have to start looking elsewhere. And you're starting to see this. You see this also happening between Japan and South Korea.
Right.
I was going to mention that.
So if China does this, if they try to hedge this, people say, well, it's not reliable, we must do it. So all you're doing is giving the U.S. the green light to put lots of money under strategic need in order to do that.
There's actually a report that the United States government is going to Burundi and Malawi in Africa
to look for resources.
To look for these
Nigeria
resources.
has some. There's a volcano down in Australia that has some. Actually, they're the most advanced. They process in Kuantan Port, Malaysia, and that's one of the largest ongoing sources that's out there. But when it was curious, when they interviewed the lady who runs this particular things, she said, well, what do you think of the future? She says, okay, I don't know, I'm involved in the business. I don't know a single PhD outside of China. But within China, I know tens. All right? And these are the people who are pushing what you can do and pushing the advances with these rare earths.
So back to a point you mentioned, Japan, South Korea. Is this a dangerous path for countries to go down, this mimicking of Trump's approach?
Yes. I think this is President Trump opened up a very bad precedent here. Clearly, Japan is taking a page out of his playbook. And it's doing the same thing with respect to South Korea. So I think from now on, every country is not going to believe in this global value chain story anymore. Everybody's going to look for cover. They're going to look for indigenous solution. They're going to be prepared for the second best. They have a plan B now. So this is actually detrimental to the international cooperation that has been going on for many years.
Let's identify what's happening here. Basically, there was an issue by South Korea over the reparations and atonement for what happened during World War II.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, Japan responded not politically. They didn't compartmentalize. They did exactly what Trump does.
Yep.
They jumped over the line and said, we're going to use trade to fight back against you. And this is never ending, because once you start that nationalist feeling on both sides, it is very hard to back down and find a solution.
I also want to mention that this national security issue, the interpretation of this issue keeps expanding in the U.S.
And in Japan.
Huawei's products is an issue of national security. The subway costs, right? The trains in the U.S.
Fast trains are.
The senators from Virginia and Maryland, they are complaining about these things. UAV, it's another issue. Monitors and sensors. And somebody even talking about antibiotics. I mean, the list keeps expanding. Yeah. So I think this is a very, very dangerous path we're getting into now.
Yeah, the hawks are definitely in power now. All right, thank you so much for your insights today. Great discussion. Aina Tanging, our current affairs commentator, and of course Professor John Gong from the University of Business and University of International Business and Economics. Thank you so much. All right, that does it for our topic today, China-US trade once again, and no doubt we'll be revisiting this topic. This has been Dialogue. I'm Chen Lei, sitting in for Yang Rui.